Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are attending this webinar from. Yeah. Today is our 53rd session for our ARSO monthly webinars. We'll be dealing with issues on strategic commodities and trade, African strategic commodities and trade, role of standardization in developing effective regional value chains for Africa's strategic commodities and promotion of intra-Africa trade and global market access. When you look at the main challenge of Africa, we have been dealing with commodities for a very, very long time, without value addition on what we sell, on what we trade. Actually, when you look at our exports, are in commodities. Today we will be thinking about how can we do it in the areas of standardization. Is something we can do to improve and respond to the needs for industrialization at our continental level? How can we improve our intra-Africa trade? That is very, very important when you look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, bringing together all the African countries. It's very challenging because when you also look at the commodities issues, there are also issues of regulations, issues related to policies within the regional economical communities, but also at the continental level. We need to see what is our role. What is our role as a standardization body? But we are also looking at the other experts who will be bringing in other components to see how at the end of the seminar we can move on and add value to what we trade in. Today's we have very good panelists. Our first panelist is from ARSO, who is in charge of standardization, is our assistant monitoring and evaluation, and in charge of technical harmonization committees at the ARSO. If you look at what ARSO does, is harmonizing standard and harmonizing conformity assessment. We will be hearing now on a specific topic from Emmanuel Kirwa on Africa strategic commodities, leveraging the benefits of standards to facilitate intra-Africa trade under the AFCFTA, the ARSO standardization and Made in Africa qualification criteria initiative. I hand over to you, Emmanuel Kirwa. Probably before you go ahead, we are providing also interpretation. Yeah, if you can click on the globe, we have French, we have also English. You can select your language. Kirwa, you have the platform.
Thank you very much, SG, for the opportunity to present. And as you have highlighted, I'll not go much into it. Perhaps most of the participants here may not be new to ARSO. So ARSO, in brief, is an intergovernmental organization that was established way back in 1977 by the then OAU and which is currently AU and UNECA at that time. And the instruments of accessions, I think at that time of establishment, were by the heads of state. At the moment, we do have 43 member states, 12 and are not already members, but they are participating in other related ARSO activities within the regional economic communities. The mission of ARSO is to facilitate inter-African trade and, of course, global trade through the use of harmonized African standards and conformity assessment guidelines. Perhaps what we need to get in this session is to just briefly look at the ratifications within the FCFTA, as well as also we see the membership. This would help us see the kind of position that we are in that we are going to trade among each other. So you're able to see here the interlink between the ARSO member states, those who have ratified and those who have deposited, signed the ratifications to the FCFTA Secretariat. You'll see also that those who are non-ARSO members and spread within the continent. So one of the challenges that we do face as member states is we do have overlapping membership within the regional economic communities, and this would bring issues to do with coordination, the collaboration for better use of resources that bring on clarity to the roles and the responsibilities, and also to take note that there exist gaps in the system, and with this, we are moving towards no duplication of effort. The other one is demand for quality products, which has been on the increase. That makes the businesses and make the business and the economy as a whole to grow. Then there is continuous industry need for the industry to meet the requirements of the market. Of course, we are looking at the markets of the importing country. For this, there is need for competitiveness of the country that are producing the products and its ability to contribute the products into the global market through the value chains. So initiatives that are being undertaken at the moment to avoid this by our Central Secretariat is to ensure that the ACTREF policy, which calls for withdrawal of conflicting standards, as well as having ARSO and the regional economic communities continental standardization strategy. So today we'll be talking about the Made in Africa initiative, and I think the document which is published contains the requirements for the sectors of competitive advantage that calls for Africa's competitive sectors. The sector interventions strategies therein also has the requirements for competitive business environment, where member states are called upon to provide for issues to do with simplicity and all that. Then we do have issues to do with the rules of origin. We have issues to do with intellectual property, issues to do with the quality and regulatory infrastructure, and then other issues are on the implementation and the institutionalization of the framework for the Made in Africa, where there is need for coordination units, institutional frameworks, the changing of mindset, and also issues to do with financial arrangements. I'll come back to this maybe later, but the Made in Africa priority sectors are linked to Agenda 2063, issues to do with agro-processing, forestry, minerals, chemicals, leather, textiles, machinery, construction, petrochemicals, the tourism, and also on issues to do with knowledge-based and logistics and transport. Now, ARSO mandate in the FCFTA harmonization would look at the issues to do with the TBT as well as SPS issues. And to address these issues, ARSA has established technical committees, 97 at the moment, that are handling standards which are of priority to the member states. And then the other issue is development of the harmonization of technical regulations, the African Quality Policy, and of course the ACTREF, African Continental Regulatory Framework. Then recognition of conformity assessment test results, this through the mutual recognition agreement, and I think this has been piloted by 8 member states. Undergoing programs to adhere to this in the strategy is ensuring that the developed and implementation of integrated African standardization system, where there is participation, and also in the participation there is involvement of those member states within the regional economic communities at the technical committee level, and as well as at the approval of the deliverables by the TCs. These ones I don't want to ensure that I process, but you'll get them in the presentations. But if you look at the standard strategy areas, is to ensure that other than issues of quality regulatory infrastructure, we also have harmonization, as I've said, in standards and conformity assessment, SPS as called by the Annex 5 and Annex 6 and 7, and then the issues of accreditation of conformity assessment services and establishing of mutual recognition arrangements. Now, one of the things that also comes out is the interplay within harmonization, which we are trying to ensure that the technical committees ensure that whatever they develop would, in a way, be able to impact on the other, and therefore there seems to be some synergies that is really needed. That whatever we do in a committee as experts will also impact on the other. Then, of course, I know this would be spoken on to, but issues to do with utilization of standards for improved products. Here I'm giving an example of I'm giving an example of the agriculture products, but we do have quite wide. So here you see we do have to respond to the issues to do with the value chain, and issues to do with agrochemicals, to do with seeds are in place. Then, of course, the utilization of standards for value addition. I don't want to go deep into that. Other issues that we are undertaking under this sector is ensure the competitiveness and enhance quality culture, is to ensure that we create a regime where there is gradual improvement. And with this, we do have a maturity model where requirements at basic, and then you move, the SMEs move in the levels as they expand on their market, as well as also considering on the period. So I think on the issues of the Made in Africa, what it tries to address on the issues of quality and safety, where the TBT matters and SPS are dealt with, rules of origin. I think I've spoken about that. Then lastly is on the intellectual property rights. So thank you very much, and I submit.
Hirwa, you spoke about in the last slides on the maturity model. Yeah, and you also spoke about the maturity model helping SMEs. Can you explain more? Does it relate to the value chains that we are talking about?
Yes, it does. The majority model actually does, because example is that at bronze level, it means that there are requirements which maybe during the certification would not be too stringent, or the banding on the requirements may not be too maybe the criticals may not be required at this level, but as it grows up, then it means that these critical requirements are looked into as you go gradually to the other levels, from bronze, silver, gold, and then diamond.
Okay, meaning an SME can start from bronze, enter to silver until the diamonds. And also has been there for many years, as you mentioned in your first slides, 1977. What are the challenges in standardization, especially when you look at to the SMEs and the implementation of standards? And probably you can also touch on what you indicated on overlapping membership.
So one of the things that actually is affecting the SMEs are that are issues to do with SPS and also TBT. One of the things that also comes in is the high cost of compliance in the regulations, and therefore, if there is adherence to the provisions, the requirements in the provisions or in the standard, then to comply with this by SMEs would become easy. The other one is issues to do with food safety. Of course, products which are safer, if you are complying with the requirements of the standards, then you are confident that your products placed in the market are safe. Then maybe as I can speak to the other issues are maybe issues to do with the accreditation, and the ARSO has been undertaking some initiatives of ensuring that at least onboarding of certification institutions by the accreditation institutions, so that as they do the certifications, they have already been accredited by the accreditation bodies.
Then, if you look at the Made in Africa criteria, what is it? Why is it coming in? If the systems have been there, why now? Why do we need the Made in Africa criteria?
So we need the Made in Africa to ensure that there are issues to do with there's predictability, of course, are put in place by the member states. The issues to do with simplicity are also addressed on, and then there are issues to do also with the transparency, issues to do with clarity that would come out when we are guided by the Made in Africa.
Thank you very much, Kirwa, for your good presentation. And I will probably come back to you if I find other questions in the chat. Our participant all over the world, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we also have interpretation and French and English. You can choose the language that you want to follow in this webinar. Thank you, Arzo. Thank you, Emmanuel Kirwa, for your presentation. Our next speaker today is Julia Spice, who is the Chief Trade and Market Intelligence from ITC. Julia will be presenting to us on Made by Africa. We are from Made in Africa. We are moving to Made by Africa. Probably it's confusing for our audience, but she will clarify, especially on the topic creating value through integration, accelerating Africa productive transformation as a policy priority for Africa's industrialization and the promotion of intra-Africa trade. The 2022 AU-EU-ITC value chain diagnostic study on strategic Africa priority sectors and opportunities within the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Julia, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here today to speak to you again about our value chain diagnostics that we have developed starting in 2021 together with AUC and commissioned by the EU to identify indeed for Africa what are the promising sectors for economic transformation and value addition. In the Made by Africa report, Made by Africa, because we really want to emphasize the fact that this is not something that is produced on the continent, but it's really produced by the continent. So it really builds upon the endowments that the continent has, the production factors that are already there, but maybe add more value to it to keep more of the gains from trade on the continent as well. So what we did there starting in 2021, the report was released 1 year later, was to identify what are the feasible and desirable value chains for development in Africa and for more regional integration. And we did not do this only from a quantitative perspective, looking at what are the possibly enabling factors, what are the opportunities that data tell us are there, but we also really wanted to understand the business perspective. So that's why we went in 2 steps. We did some data analysis in ITC, and then we went to the field and mapped our findings with the experiences of the business sector. Our starting point was the vast range of products that are distinguished in the harmonized system. So we started with a range of more than 5,300 products. And the first exercise that we did was to map them into value chains, because from the harmonized system, it's not actually fully clear of what are raw products that can be used as inputs and what are maybe value-added output products. So we have linked all of these products into 415 value chains. And we did not only map what are inputs and outputs of value chains, but we also looked into the extent to which, in order to produce a given output product, what is the portion of inputs that is needed? So does this output product consist to maybe 40% of one input, 20% of another input, 10% of yet another input, and so on. So we have an exact mapping of inputs and outputs into value chains, as well as the extent to which inputs are needed to produce a given output. And this was for us the basis to start the analysis and see what is actually feasible in Africa, looking at what is already there in terms of inputs, what is already there in terms of also transformative capacity, and from there identify what could be developed in the future. So this is really an approach that has a forward-looking perspective, because it does not only look into what is already currently being produced, but given the endowments and the production factors available on the continent, what could be produced in the future. And the idea was to see what is feasible, but also what is desirable for the continent. So what is in line with the development priorities for the region. And for that, we went into consultation. So once we had the feasible value chains, we found that 94 out of the 415 value chains are feasible for development in Africa. Sometimes it requires several countries to partner. Sometimes it requires even several RECs to work together, but 94 value chains are feasible from a supply side perspective. And then we went to ask ourselves, so which of these 94 value chains are most aligned with the development priorities of the continent? And there we went into consultations with AUC, with the private sector, with also our partners from ARSO and other agencies on the continent, to see which of those value chains should be actually prioritized to best meet the development objectives of the continent. So we considered different factors that were mentioned. So we wanted to emphasize value chains that involve at least 5 different African countries and 2 different RECs to really have this continental dimension here. We wanted to see what are the demand prospects of these value chains, because yes, maybe they are feasible from a supply side perspective, but if demand in key markets is not set to grow, then maybe it's not worth investing into these value chains. So we wanted to be sure that they also have solid demand prospects in the coming years. We wanted to prioritize also value chains that encourage investment, where there is a clear interest from investors to partner with African businesses. This investment could come from the continent or also from foreign investors. And through these consultations that require then also additional assessments on our side, but also taking into account the already defined strategic priorities of key actors, 4 value chains were prioritized for an initial pilot, and these were cotton-based apparel, so cotton garments, pharmaceutical components, motor vehicles and parts, and food products, and here in particular, infant food. So these were the 4 value chains that among the 94 that were considered as most important to meet the strategic development priorities of the continent. As I already mentioned, it was important for us to understand also the private sector perspective for these 4 pilot value chains. And for that, we went into consultations and face-to-face interviews with over 1,250 businesses and other business support organizations to understand their views of why these value chains may be promising, but have maybe not materialized yet to the extent possible. So we went into these consultations to understand the challenges that businesses and business support organizations are facing, what holds them back from further integrating in the continent, further expanding their business, from effectively connecting to these priority value chains. And from these insights that we collected from the private sectors, we were able to identify key factors that would enable change. So key recommendations of factors of things that need to be changed in order for these value chains to strive. For the remainder of this presentation, I want to focus a little bit on the automotive sector, because we have had a lot of follow-up work. So we have also some interesting new insights that we gathered since this Made by Africa report was published. But first, let me tell you a bit of what we heard from businesses when we were consulting them. And I want to highlight 4 challenges that were frequently mentioned by businesses in the automotive sectors. The first challenge was that automotive or businesses connected to the automotive industry felt that there was sometimes a lack of a continental vision. So while there is indeed many strategies on the automotive sectors in different countries, sometimes these national strategies are not coherent or not leading to a common continental strategy or vision. So this was one of the things that we heard frequently from the businesses that we interviewed. The second factor, or the second frequently mentioned issue was that there are challenges related to waste disposal, but also more in general to move towards a more environmentally friendly production of vehicles. So these were a bit environmental concerns that were frequently mentioned. Third, there was a feeling that there is a limited institutional capacity to actually certify firms and in their exports against complex rules of origin and quality criteria. So there was a bit of work needed to enhance the business support environment for these businesses to actually be better able to certify against these complex rules of origin and quality criteria. And finally, there's also a limited capacity on the side of the businesses to comply then with these criteria. So a bit of guidance and capacity building also needed for businesses. These challenges, we've translated them then into selected points of action. This is not exhaustive. As I already said, there were many things that were also mentioned that are cross-cutting here and focusing a bit on the specific items mentioned by players, actors in the automotive industry. So first, very clearly from the mention of many national visions existing, but sometimes not leading to a coherent continental vision, that would be the first point, to define perhaps a common continental vision for the automotive sector. And a lot of this has been already happening since 2022. So these are really the results that we gathered 2021-22. So glad to see that. Then the second point, harmonization of standards, including also for parts and components, because we have many economic actors on the continent in North Africa, but also in Southern Africa, that may not be producing a final vehicle, but that are contributing with wires, with other parts into the automotive industries. And for them also important that they are confronted with harmonized systems so that it's easier for them to comply with the different requirements. Then what I already mentioned is that there was many actors felt that they could have the business support environment could be a bit more conducive and helping them to actually get certified. So this translated into maybe the need to improve the availability of specialized testing and certification facilities, to map maybe already what exists, where are gaps still available, to see if these existing facilities can be upgraded or if there's a need to come with new facilities, to improve also their accessibility, especially across borders. And finally, on the business side, to really clarify the rules and to optimize the rules of origin and the related certification needs, to build the capacity of businesses to comply with these rules, and in general to have more transparency on what it takes to get certified, what is the cost and time that is linked to that. So these are a bit the enabling factors. And finally, yes, the point on environment, to invest more in recycling facilities, so to address the point of problems with waste disposal as well. So these are some selected points of action that came out from the business interviews. You find the full list of action in the report, in the Made by Africa report. From this first phase, we have moved now into a second phase where we are really zooming into 3 of the 4 priority value chains. So within the food value chains, we have been zooming into fortified complementary foods, so really food products that help combat under or malnutrition. in the automotive sector, we have zoomed into specific chemistries for e-vehicle batteries. And in the pharma sector, we have zoomed in deeper into antibiotics in tablet form and routine vaccines. So let me quickly guide you through our additional findings since the Made by Africa report. Again, focusing on the automotive sector and the e-vehicle batteries that we are targeting in the second phase. So for automotive, we have looked and compared 4 different specifications, 4 different chemistries of e-vehicle batteries. And these are chemistries where we already from the onset believed that a lot of inputs and a lot of capacity is available on the African continent. So we wanted to see which of these chemistries may be best to develop on the African continent, given resource endowments, but also given demand prospects and also strategic priorities. So we have looked across these 4 chemistries, and our starting point was to map very precisely the chemistry needed to produce a specific type of batteries, looking at the different stages of the value chain, starting from the raw materials, so what is already there in terms of critical minerals that are needed for the production of a specific type of battery, to the refined and processed materials and the final battery materials that are then the final stage going into or needed for the production of a specific type of batteries. And we are looking here into lithium-ion batteries. Now, some of our findings in the second phase, and I should say that the second phase research is still going on. So we have done the quantitative part, so we've done the data assessment, and we are still looking into collecting more voices, again, from the business sector, understanding better the business support environment to then develop really actionable roadmaps. So let me quickly tell you what are our findings from the first part, from the assessment stage of what is available and what is feasible in terms of production of these different chemistries for battery value chains. So one of our findings was that when we look at the right side here, we look at what is available in terms of raw materials, then a lot of the critical minerals actually needed to produce lithium-ion batteries are available on the continent. But the more we move to the left to more processed and refined battery materials, the less available currently are the needed inputs into this value chain. So to see an example, phosphate, for instance, is the only critical mineral that is already transformed to battery material stage and can directly be used into the production of lithium-ion batteries, whereas most of the other materials, for instance, aluminium, but also manganese and copper, they are widely available at raw material stage, but not yet so much processed into battery material stage. So for that, from that, we already have some preliminary conclusions. For instance, there is a need really to invest into transformative capacity for some of these materials, especially for aluminium, manganese and iron, to move these to more refined and then finally battery material stage. For other materials such as lithium, what is available on the continent may not be sufficient to reach the export target of 15 billion US dollars of lithium-ion battery exports from the continent. So maybe here we would need to consider additional sourcing from non-African suppliers as well that have potential to export this product also to the continent. And finally, for yet other inputs, investment into mining may be needed. So one example is graphite, where Africa holds 1/5 of the world graphite reserves, but what is currently really available already to be used in the battery value chain is rather limited and currently not sufficient to meet a substantial export target. We have then moved to map the different availabilities of inputs and outputs across the different critical minerals so we have mapped countries to the different critical minerals at the different stages of the value chain. And we see that there's really a vast availability of inputs also already at different stages of the value chain, but especially in terms of the first step, in terms of the raw material. So there's really a need to push that up and transform these inputs so that they can be also used for developing a more value-added value chain on the continent. As I already said, this is just really the first step. This work is ongoing. What we need to do now, as we have finalized this assessment and we have an idea of what is available in terms of the different battery chemistries, but we have done similar assessments also for pharma and for infant food, looking at different recipes of ready-to-use therapeutic food, also to combat malnutrition. Now that we have done these assessments, we need to map the available business support environment, look into what is available in terms of testing facilities, in terms of certification bodies. Is this sufficient in order to drive these value chains forward, or are there gaps? Is there a need for investing further into the business support environment? We are doing a similar check and a similar mapping of the existing policy frameworks. Are they conducive to helping this value chain to strive, or would there be a need to tweak certain policy in order for this value chain to perform better? So this should then lead in a year's time to very tangible operational roadmaps for these three sectors that we've been looking into now, with very concrete recommendations of what needs to change, what needs to maybe what requires additional support in order for these value chains to really effectively work on the continent. So this is the first step for us. We have other programs. The ATCMA programs are currently starting that you may have heard of, where we are working in each REC, also on value chain development, as well as at the continental level. And it is important for us to link the efforts already made in the Made by Africa report to whatever we are going to do at the different REC levels. So to really have also here a harmonized and a coherent approach, and that we really link the work that is already being done in the RECs to the efforts made at the continental level. And finally, obviously, ITC is not going to implement all of the action plan, but we need to partner, and we are very happy to see already many efforts to work on the pharma and automotive value chains, in particular across the African continent, including efforts by ARSO, and we are looking forward to partner to really implement then also the priority actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. It's very intriguing. Very intriguing. Why? I am asking myself, and I would like to ask you directly. Yeah. What is the difference? Yeah, the study on the value chain, yes, done at continental level, yes. Yeah, but as you stated that you looked at product, more than 5,000 product came up at the end of 94 feasible value chains. And we have also different studies in the regional economical communities, and you have also looked at least 5 countries or 2 regional economical communities. Then I am asking myself, we have 8 regional economical communities that we know under the African Union. We have one of the biggest, which is COMESA, that they have regional value chain under COMESA. Then this study, what is new? What is new that it will not end up being just a study like any other?
Yes, very important question indeed. So I think what is new to this work, really from what I have presented now, there are more elements coming to it. As I said, this is also work in progress, but what is new, I don't think that anyone has ever done a mapping of value chains. So already to know to produce a car, what do you need? And there are actually thousands of inputs needed to produce a car, a vehicle. And to know already what is needed to produce a car and to which extent the different parts are needed, I think this is a first step for us to really have a very clear idea how far we can move in Africa and maybe which sub-value chain, for which sub-value chain the African continent is best positioned. I don't think that systematically this has ever been really assessed to understand for a car we need X% of aluminium, Y% of leather, Z% of maybe wires, and to bring that together and see from there which sub-value chain, in which sub-value chain the continent has a comparative advantage also towards other players, and where we could really join forces and bring different countries together to develop this comparative advantage and become a strong player for this given sub-value chain. I don't think this has ever been done as systematically as we have done it now. And then I think the second thing, I mean, obviously we are aware of all these efforts, and there are also really great studies already out there, as you said, and we don't want to ignore them. But I think what is important for us also is to bring this very granular assessment together with the business view, so that we really hear from the businesses themselves of what are the challenges they face, and that we collect also these business voices in a form where businesses feel free to express themselves, so that they are not necessarily invited already to an event where they have maybe their government also there, but they can express their voice in an anonymous way. And then later we map that also with the available government support, and we see if there are actually any gaps that may need to be filled. So I think these are, I would say, the two elements where the approach may differ a little bit from what has been out there. But yes, we are definitely aware, and we are also building up on already existing studies. So there's no way, we don't want to duplicate any work that already has been done. We are more seeking to establish linkages to the existing work and maybe fill some gaps, be it from the granularity of the assessment or from bringing in the business voice.
I like actually what you presented and what you just said on the automotive, and the last map you have indicated where we can get the raw materials. That's why I also like one of the key issues that came up on harmonization of standards, because I am looking at those components that investors have, the business community has indicated that we need the standard for the components. And I am also looking at maybe one component will come from country X and not operate in a car because they did not go with the right standard. But my question is not really on the standard. Maybe I will come back to Emmanuel later on. My question is, you are also focusing on the e-batteries, e-vehicles batteries. But do you think the continent is ready to embrace the e-vehicles, to embrace the hybrids, or new, I mean new vehicles, because we don't also want to be a dumping continent where the e-vehicles are coming in, but we are not really having the investors in this sector at the continental level. That's why probably one of the participants was asking what is made in Africa and made by Africa. But do you think we are ready to have this value chain of the automotive moving along? without, when I look at the map you have shown us, do we have even hard infrastructure, road, railways that will bring materials from country X to another country? How ready are we to implement at least one of the four key value chain? Yeah, let's be specific on the automotive because you went into details on this one.
Yes. So to fully answer the question, I think we would need to really have the action plan already developed, and we are not yet there. But from what I can already say from the supply side assessment that I've presented now is, in terms of input availability, I think Africa is very ready to develop these value chains. Specifically, I did not present it. I focused on the lithium iron because it's a bit more interesting from what is there, what is not there. But we also looked at sodium iron batteries, and these are batteries that are used for light vehicles, for 2 to 3 wheelers. And there it's, in terms of, I'm just talking about input availability, the situation looks even better than for lithium iron on the continent. Sodium iron inputs are almost to 100% already available on the African continent. And I also think that if this value chain is being developed for then also serving, catering African consumers, that may have also more elevated demand because it is used for, as said, for light vehicles, 2 to 3 wheelers that are maybe where there is, I think, a strong demand also on the African continent. Now, of course, you mentioned a very important point, and this is something that we are still to come to, is the support infrastructure. And I've mentioned that we are going to assess that in detail, but that's a very important point, that we also ensure that the infrastructure is there, and we see if there's also an appetite for investing into this infrastructure. So I would be very happy to come back to your webinar maybe in a year's time when we have all these insights. What I can say for now from a supply perspective, especially for sodium iron, definitely. But yes, there's many other steps still needed. And you mentioned one of them, and this is the infrastructure that has to come along with the availability of only inputs.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me hope. I also have hope. And you mentioned it, we can do the 3-wheelers, the 2-wheelers, and then the raw materials are there. We can say they are there. Thank you for that. And I look forward to another webinar. Now, when probably will be showing us, okay, what I told you in this year, 2025, now happened. Thank you very much for the good presentation, Spice. Yeah, thank you. I will probably come back to you when I say another question. If you look at what we have heard from Arzo, Emmanuel, expert, Julia, on the Made in by Africa, Made in Africa criteria, now the issues also on e-vehicles. I would like to hear from Komi, who is the regional advisor on AFCFTA in UNDP. Yeah, on the policy issues, on sustainability issues, specifically on why prioritizing the development of regional value chains for key and strategic commodities for Africa. Is it strategy for sustainable industrialization and development and boosting intra-Africa trade? Let's hear from Komi. Komi, the platform is yours.
Can you see my screen? Let me put it on. Can you see the screen?
No, we can see you. We cannot see your presentation.
Okay, let me share again. I think. Is it okay now? Let me.
Yes, it's okay now.
Okay. So thanks
Yeah,
very
thank
much.
you.
Almost always a pleasure to also work with you at ARSO, but also all colleagues for ITC and UNIDO, and most also of the participants. Some of them also will be engaged at the country level. So from us at UNDP, as you all know, our core is really to contribute to a sustainable and inclusive development. And over the past few years, actually, have been investing a lot in the AFCFTA. But before that, I had also opportunity to work a lot in UNCTAD in Geneva and also with UNECA. And when I started working actually 10, 11 years ago in the UN system, at that time I was working on commodities. But after all those years, when I look back again I look currently where we are, we have not moved much, although some countries have been able to industrialize, especially on some specific sectors. The continent, as we all know, continue to depend a lot on export of raw materials. How do we change that? So here I think what my reflection is, cool, the regional value chain, a solution, and why we are thinking. Personally, I think I would like to start with this example of some of these data from the cocoa value chain. And we all know the cocoa to chocolate value chains that moves from cocoa beans, our continents, notably Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Cameroon, Nigeria, are the main producers. But if we look into the value-added contents in the bigger producer on the continent, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Ghana, and if we compare them with Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brazil, other large cocoa producers, most of the value that we are creating, that's what the diagram is actually showing, is still at the level of the beans, cocoa butter, and powder, and the paste. But most of the value, more than 70–80%, we create is at the level of the cocoa beans. And we all know that when you look into the value chain of those commodities, the most of the value is created actually when you move up the ladder, chocolate, cocoa paste, and others. Of course, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, we are seeing, or we have seen over the past few years, investments in the upper side of cocoa butter and powder, cocoa paste, and some chocolate. But we are still far from getting there. Now, when we look into Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brazil, most of the value actually are being created at the level of cocoa powder and cocoa butter, cocoa paste, and chocolate. Of course, most of the chocolate, we know the value actually created in Europe and US. But how can we leverage now on the regional integration effort to increase the value, to retain more value in those value chains? So the second one, actually the second diagram, what is showing us is the value-added contents when it's come to the regional market, which link to regional value chains. And of course, we see clearly that African continent, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, and Ghana here, in the case of cocoa, their contribution to the regional market is quite low, especially if we look into what is happening in Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil. Those countries were able to integrate better their regional market as a first way to start exporting also to the world market. Look, this doesn't happen overnight. We all know. It needs strategic decisions. We are happy to see the continent coming now to integrate more with the AFCFTA, but we still also, we have had the REX. So how can we listen from REX as we implement the AFCFTA? But the way forward for the continent is really how do we develop those regional value chains? I'm sure most of us here, we have our own idea suggestions, but I think it should start probably with discussions at the sub-regional level. Can we come in the case, if I still take the case of cocoa and cocoa chocolate, can we have a discussion at the level of West Africa as a region, West Central Africa, to see it's not easy to say, oh, this country should focus on processing the beans or this one. But of course, we all know it will depend on the competitive and comparative advantages of each country. And then beyond the RECs, we now come to the continental level. And then, of course, global level are some of the study done by ITC. So a few years ago, when we look into some RECs, what we did a map when I was in with the UN Economic Commission of Africa, we look into some RECs and some potential for value chains development. But we are not seeing yet discussions, sub-regional strategy. COMESA, fortunately, has done a lot when it's come to the textile, leather to leather product and some textile value chain, because COMESA has a clear strategy for leather value chains. Do we have a strategy in West Africa for cocoa to chocolates? Not yet, as a region, I mean, not individually. So these are some of the discussion I think we should have. We are trying as UNDP to have sub-regional when we have 2-3 countries, but we're also looking into working more with partners to have those discussions of regional value chains at the RECs and at the sub-regional levels. This will be my last slides, but this is where I want us maybe to focus a bit more in terms of when it's come to now building the regional value chains. I think it's quite important to add more value. We all know if we really want to create that inclusive and sustainable development on the continent. We are also moving, as we know, toward green industrialization. And I'm sure probably our colleague from UDO will come back to some of those greening industrialization. But I do believe on the continent, while we use our traditional methods to pursue our industrialization, we need also to start investing in the green practices because that is also a trend, the global trend. Now, when it's come to now, how do we build our regional value chains? I think we all know when it's come to specific characteristics, features of countries, we need to account, for instance, for those that have certain level of industrialization on the continent. And we have some good example when it's come to the automotive, for instance, in South Africa. We have the great factories or assembly of automotive industry, strong automotive industry in South Africa. But that automotive industry in South Africa has to rely, for instance, on supply of leather input from Botswana and textile input from Lesotho, for instance. So these are some of those success stories I will say we need to do more to develop them. Of course, all of them, those countries are part of SACU, where we see some level of harmonization when it comes to standard and others and trade policies. But we still have challenges. A few years ago, I think 2 years ago, when we went to the Intra-African Trade Fair in Egypt, actually an entrepreneur we have been supporting at UNDP Lesotho was not able to get the certification for standard, but she was allowed to come and exhibit in Egypt. And her challenge is she has to pay 10,000 USD to get the certification because it's not done in Lesotho, and it's been the certification is done in South Africa. So the whole process will cost that SME in what do we call it? In the cosmetic sector, 10,000, and she doesn't have it. How can we simplify also the costs of certification? I hope ARSO colleagues will give us some insight on that. But it starts also with harmonization or at least mutual recognition among African countries. Second group of countries is those that are agricultural producers. Look, we know how critical agricultural production is for the continent. And we also know the challenges that the sector is facing when it comes to the supply chain management and waste management. So those countries that are likely to become the production hub of agricultural products will certainly be those who will be able to manage well the waste, but also what I call shorter supply chain, in the sense that we need to have the regional approach, but we need to start with countries that are maybe sharing the same borders because of the cost also of transportation and so and so. Of course, we have other countries that are resource-rich countries, including minerals, and those that are also landlocked and are land-linked and coastal. And so each country will have its own way also to integrate the market, the regional value chain, but we know it will be very difficult. But when it comes to my last point, in terms of the requirement, the cross-cutting issues, what we have to put in place to make it happen, I think first, certainly, it's having the right regulatory framework for industrialization and trade. At national, at regional, which also include a lot of work around harmonizing standards. Some countries even still do have weak institution when it comes to standard. I think, for instance, we are currently supporting, I think we have also worked last year with ARSO in Lesotho, and that work continue. I think UNDP will continue investing in Lesotho to support strengthening the standard certification and standard authority. I do believe we also need political will if we want to build regional value chain, because some countries need to decide their positioning and position themselves on that nodes of the value chain. There is a country, for instance, recently, Togo, which produce cashew nut, want to develop processing factories of the cashew nut in Togo, but the investor informed that they are already having a lot of production capacity in Cote d'Ivoire. So better, sourcing the cashew nut from Togo, take them to process them in Cote d'Ivoire. That is totally normal. We don't need to all process locally our product. Let's see which region or which country is better positioned. And when we talk about those agro-food, for example, Togo is well positioned for soybean, including bio soybean. So Togo can become a regional hub for production and processing of soybean and so and so. The market structure, I think, is very important. Currently, when you take the case of cocoa, the market is fully liberalized in Cote d'Ivoire. It's partially liberalized in Ghana. So both countries do not have the same market structure. It will be challenging for the region to come with a regional value chain approach. So we need to also, again, when we talk about how our market, our structures, we need to have alignment, complementarity, harmonization of the rules that regulates our market. Alignment, harmonization of policy, practice, rules, I think we can't say it enough. It's important. And I also congratulate ARSO for being the arm now under the CFT also to continue doing that work. And this is something I think should remain a priority, aligning policies, advocate a lot for mutual recognition. I think among some countries that will be a winner, a quick winner in the short term. But when we talk about regional value chain, all other aspects of skills development, do we have the right skills on the continent? Currently, yes, but what is the challenges in, for instance, sometimes some countries want to develop. I have few countries I know in Central Africa who want to develop the pharmaceutical sector, but they don't have the skills currently. How can we also export those skills from other African countries? That's where we're also seeing the liberalization of movement of people or skills on the continent. And then other issues around services sector, infrastructure. And to conclude, I think we need to also work on peace and stability on the continent if we want to foster development of regional value chain. So these are some of the key points related to the policy I wanted to highlight. And these are also some of the priority for UNDP, including through our country offices when we work with our sister UN agencies and non-UN agencies toward realizing the AFCFTA ambition. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kwame. Thank you for the good insights on this subject. We can talk about political will. We can talk about regulatory framework, but when you see the sustainable development being social, economical, and environment, and I know the work of UNDP on inclusiveness, on the issues of women and youth. Yeah, what is the position you put the women and youth business in this value chain?
Look, yeah. So what we are seeing is that when we are creating a market, of course, for the continent, and we don't want a market where only large corporations are dominating. That's usually what happens in free trade space, right? We know how the continent, the women, for instance, women entrepreneurs are contributing when it's come to cross-border trade. Youth, where they're contributing when it's come to digitalization, innovation, and others. So most of our intervention actually are linked to make the production and trade landscape more inclusive by integrating more of those women and youth into the market. And we do believe that reducing the cost, for instance, first, of compliance is something that is quite important if we want those women and young entrepreneurs to integrate the market. That's why I give example, for example, in Lesotho, where through the UNDP Lesotho, we are not supporting establishment or strengthening of the regulatory authority when it comes to standard. We have done similar work also in Malawi to reduce the costs of compliance as well. Of course, not providing necessarily grants, but strengthening the capacity of those institutions to be able to provide those certification processes at the national level, to avoid, for instance, an entrepreneur in Lesotho going to maybe the certification process in another country in the region, cost of transportation, bringing the sample also to other countries. So these are some of the issues we are working.
I would guess if we give the example of Lesotho, that Lesotho is trading more also with South Africa. Yeah, and there is an issue for free movement. And when you look at the policy issues as a policy that we should put there, if the private sector cannot move, meaning how the goods will also move, and we need the money, the investment, as the private speaker from ITC was talking about. What do you think? Because all those protocol initiatives are there, but implementation is very key. Do you give us hope that things will go well? We can have nice policies, we have a good framework, and we will move on in the near future.
Yes, I think we all know integration is a process. So for me, I have been working also on this a lot of integration program in Africa over the past years. Sometimes we do believe things are slow, a lot of complaint. Yes, we can do more to speed up some projects to effectively implement, but we need also all those capacity for implementation. When you take the AFCFTA is not only about trades, as you know. So we need to have all the capacity to come in an integrated manner to support implementation. Few countries are doing well, like Ghana, when it comes to the implementation of the AfCFTA, South Africa, Egypt, and others. So we are also documenting those success stories and sharing with some other countries. That's why I think I see a lot of investment actually in the AfCFTA, because we do believe, I think all the partners, that is the way forward. But the speeds we need to also take into consideration that some countries might be quicker than others, but then how do we not design programs to support those countries that have limited capacity? So that will be my response to that.
Maybe we will do the coalition of the willing. Come back on that maybe if we get time. Thank you very much, Kwame, for your insights. And our next speaker, we will probably talk more on this, because he is now looking at, yes, we have the products, we have the value chains, but if we don't develop an industry that's has also products but has also money, the investors, if they are there, and it should also be sustainable, we will be having a problem. We have two speakers from UNIDO. One is Catherine Mwangi, who is a project administrator in UNIDO, and Francois Dene, who is the chief technical advisor in UNIDO. They will be now talking to us on Africa's strategic commodities and why the effective regional value chains remain key in boosting Africa industrial products, intra-Africa trade, and exports in global trade. UNIDO's initiatives in strengthening Africa's industrial transformation of Africa, strategic commodities, and regional value chains through quality infrastructure. Catherine Mwangi and Francois Dene, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nsengimana. Dear colleagues, I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, please. We can hear you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for according us this great opportunity to participate in this very important webinar. We are honored to be here. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Can you put on full screen? Yes, now we can see it.
It's okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So from UNIDO's side, we are going to run through a short and a very quick presentation in the interest of time. The outline is as follows. First, we are going to give you a brief introduction and context of UNIDO technical cooperation in Africa. Second, we are going to dive into the technical cooperation delivery under the framework of the Third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, IDD3. And third, we are going to give you some selected examples of current projects which are being implemented by UNIDO and are focusing on developing effective regional value chains for Africa's strategic commodities and promotion of intra-African trade with the linkage to global market access. So for the introduction and context of UNIDO technical cooperation in Africa, UNIDO's initiatives are anchored on Agenda 2063, the African Union's Agenda 2063, which recognizes the importance of industrialization under its goal on transformed economies. And the priority areas that have been indicated here include manufacturing, industrialization, and value addition, amongst others, as the generator of decent jobs in the continent. We also anchor our initiatives on the African Continental Free Trade Area, which we know came into force in 2019, and we saw the start of trading taking place in January 2021. We are well aware that the AFCFTA presents the continent with a really great opportunity to promote not only intra-African trade, but also trade with the global markets. UNIDO contributions UNIDO contributes indeed to the aspirations of the African Continental Free Trade Area through its technical cooperation portfolio in Africa. We also anchor our initiatives on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, specifically focusing on Goal 9, which is looking at building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation. In addition, we also focus on inclusive and sustainable industrial development. This is really the mandate of UNIDO as described in the Lima Declaration. Coming to the third industrial development decade for Africa, which we call IDD3 in short. IDD3 was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 293, which was adopted in 2016 in New York. And from this resolution, UNIDO was designated to lead and operationalize the third industrial development decade for Africa implementation in cooperation with key partners in the continent, that being the African Union Commission, AUDA, NEPAD, and also the Economic Commission for Africa. UNIDO was also designated to collaborate with the African Union to scale up its technical assistance to African countries so as to really boost the industrial development in the continent, building on the work that had been done before with the previous development decades for Africa. We might remember that we had IDDA 1 from 1980 to 1990, followed by IDDA 2 from 2000 from around, I think it's 2003, if I'm not wrong, followed by IDDA 3. UNIDO was also mandated to promote North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation. And this is in support of Africa's industrialization, for example, through the TICAD platform and other platforms that the organization collaborates with to spur Africa's industrial development. UNIDO was also invited to work together with the international community, together with our UN sister agencies, and also the development financial institutions, and also private sector and civil society, to ensure full support to the development decade, implementation, and the goals and aspirations that are attributed to it. So just to quickly mention that IDD3, the aim of the IDD3 is to firmly anchor Africa on a path towards inclusive and sustainable industrial development. And from this IDD3 framework, it has provided the opportunity for the development of the UNIDO strategy for Africa, 2023-2025, where we base our technical cooperation initiatives in the continent. In terms of the technical cooperation delivery under the IDDA3, first to mention that Africa indeed is the largest UNIDO technical assistant recipient. We see that over 50% of UNIDO's technical cooperation is actually found in the continent. Across 6 focus areas of the UNIDO strategy for Africa that I had mentioned from the previous slide. Over the period 2023 to this month in this year, we find that we had 369 ongoing projects with a total budget of $624.9 million US dollars and expenditure of 394.2 million. Maybe just to put a remark here that these are figures for the projects that are in actual implementation. We have not yet included figures for flagship initiatives, for example, the African Trade Competitiveness and Market Access Program, which is a key initiative, including others that are still in the harder pipeline. So these figures will tend to change in the future. The total projects and expenditure per focus area of the UNIDO strategy for Africa are as follows, as shown on the screen. From focus area 1 to focus area 6, we have 21 projects with this amount of value. Depending on the specific focus area, then you can see how many projects we have in the organization and the portfolio associated to it. The next slide will give some more clarity. So I mentioned the strategy for Africa, which is focusing on these 6 focus areas. So which are these areas, you might be asking? Focus area 1, as you can see on the screen, it's looking at investing in people. Focus area 2, it's looking at enhancing firm and industry level productivity and competitiveness. Focus area 3 is looking at supporting the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation. Area 4 is looking at promoting sustainable energy and just transition. And 5 is looking at promoting sustainable growth and climate action. And 6 is looking at strengthening cooperation, strategic partnerships, and innovative financing. We have heard from the other speakers, the other panelists, the importance of ensuring that there is adequate financing in the continent. We know that most of the MSMEs in Africa are facing a big hurdle when it comes to accessing finance for their various activities. So below are 2 graphs. One is looking at the total budget and expenditure per focus area, and the other one is showing the number of projects per focus area that I had mentioned in my previous screen. So, for example, how to read the map? I don't know if, oh, sorry. It's not moving, but for example, if we look at focus area 1, investing in people, we have various projects, for example, projects that are looking into skills development, with a particular focus on women and youth. As the previous speakers had mentioned, it is important to not forget the the minority groups, but also empower the women and youth groups, and also promote skills development for the different workforce that are involved in the different areas of industrialization in the continent. So from total budget and expenditure.
Catherine, bear in mind the time constraint because you have another presenter. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Apologies for taking a long time. Yes, actually, this is my final slide. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Francois. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Chair. And I just want to congratulate you, Chair, because you have such an excellent audience today, and I see many good friends and colleagues also. So what a privilege for us to be part of this very esteemed audience that you brought together. So whilst Catherine has given an overall outline of the more strategic approach we have towards industrialization in terms of the continent, I would like to just bring this back a little bit to make it more practical in terms of the aspects of some of the current projects that we are engaged with. And you saw from Catherine's presentation, there's a massive project portfolio. So this is a really small snapshot, but these are very specific to especially the Southern African development community, and all these projects have a very particular target to enhance value chains with the ultimate result being to have created jobs, but also to allow that economies can grow through exports. And this is ultimately how we would like to develop, the continent. So I did not include any slide in terms of the definition of quality infrastructure, but because Catherine was very quick, actually, I will like to just mention, and also for the colleagues, that when we talk about quality infrastructure, we talk about the infrastructure that we require to be in place to enable various aspects of industrialization then and trade to be possible, and where such infrastructure is required to be aligned with the expectations and requirements and provisions of the WTO and the various agreements that actually we see within regs in terms of industrialization as such, and especially the agreements on trade. So we're talking very particularly then around the aspects of standardization, of accreditation, of metrology, and then of also the aspects of policy that deals also with matters of technical regulation and such. And then importantly, how that infrastructure then is important in enabling competent conformity assessment services and calibration services to be offered, and whether that is testing and inspection or certification, and together with calibration, these are the enabling services that we understand that industries and operators would require for their products to ultimately be accepted in various markets. So this is our definition then of quality infrastructure. So just for that people are clear what we talk about. So one of the long-standing projects that we've engaged with, which is predominantly been working through the environment in South Africa, is the Global Quality and Standards Program, which is supported by the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SAECO, and where we have been focusing on the development of essential and vegetable oils value chains. Essential oils and vegetable oils, especially essential oils, being regarded as high value, ultimate value chains, especially where these can find their way into international markets that would include, for example, pharmaceutical and cosmetics. And this is really important. And this work has been done from the perspective of looking at the regulatory compliance for these products to enter the market of the European Union. And whilst the project has been focused on South Africa, this has been also leading a number of the initiatives for the development of these value chains throughout the SADC region, you will find in the next example of the project that we are working on in Mozambique. And with Mozambique, we've been working with the European Union over a period of about 15 years to establish and strengthen the quality infrastructure, and very specifically to focus on on those products where the EU would be a market. And of course, the EU has very stringent compliance requirements, especially in terms of food and food-related products. And this really has been pushing the envelope for a country like Mozambique to ensure that they can remain compliant with the ever-changing regulatory environment, especially from the perspective of the European Commission and from the perspective of DG Sante that deals with food safety and such. So in Mozambique, in particular, we have been focusing over the last 6 years very specifically on the development of the fisheries fishery sector and specific fishery products where these are being exported to the EU, and a whole selection of agricultural products, which would include products such as, of course, groundnuts and such, and the more commonly agricultural products that are exported, for example, oilseeds and sesame seeds, and the package of comprising that, but also importantly, the positioning of essential oils as an industry of the future within Mozambique, where the work that we've been doing assists to inform interested producers of essential oils and farmers of what the compliance requirements will be. And we're looking at this from the perspective of the entire value chain, because, when agricultural products, it all starts even with the farming aspect. So from the perspective of starting to work the land and the inputs into that, whether it's fertilizers and clean water and all of that, and how the entire value chain from that perspective needs to be supported to allow a product to ultimately enter the market of the EU. And of course, it's not just the sanitary and phytosanitary aspects. There are significant TBT requirements, especially if we look at aspects such as packaging and labeling and such, that also come into play. So it's quite a holistic approach. And so this program with Mozambique, after many, many years, I think it's total about 16 years, will conclude end of April this year. And we trust that this will benefit Mozambique in the long run to actually enhance the exports from the country to especially the EU. Very importantly is the example then of the work we've been doing with a different donor, and this brings it back to Africa itself. So the reason I brought as the last slide the work and our collaboration with including a number of implementation partners on the continent is the Profish Blue project, which is very specifically aimed at developing various aspects of the fisheries sector and related products within the SADC region. And here we are working specifically with the SADC Secretariat. And of course, the SADC Secretariat is also quite responsible to have in place the various structures that are important in view of quality infrastructure development and enhancement. And this would be, of course, as we know, the SADC stands and the SADC METs and the SADC MELs and all the regulatory parts and such that feed into that. Now, what's really interesting for us in the Profish Blue project. Now, the Profish Blue project looks specifically at cross-border trade of fisheries, and we have quite a focus in there on how we can enhance the one-stop border posts operations, and how do we capacitate and harmonize order conformity assessment procedures associated with cross-border trade. And I'm very excited because here is a good example of a long-standing collaboration we've had with ARSHA as a partner. In this context, ARSHA has been leading the work, for example, on the harmonization of fishery standards. It's really interesting for us that we still find a lot of the member states, especially the SADC region, still not adopting harmonized standards. And we see, especially in countries like Mozambique, to single them out because I'm actively involved there, there's not yet a common approach to really adopt harmonized standards. This, of course, the fact that harmonized standards really ensure that there's a common basis for products in the various aspects of that. This is really so important in terms of facilitating Pan-African trade, but also ultimately to ensure that as we collaborate as countries and member states and regs over on the continent, that collective strengthening and being aligned in terms of harmonized approaches, also in terms of conformity assessment. And here again, the African Union is doing a lot of work through PACI and their associated structures with coming up with harmonized frameworks, will allow us obviously to ensure that the continent as a whole should upgrade to the point where all the benefits that are being derived from the developmental support, the technical assistance that's provided, ultimately should facilitate not just trade between our countries in the continent, but also importantly with international markets. So maybe just the last slide then, and to conclude from our side, and apologies, a lot of information in a relatively short space of time. Catherine, so just the last slide. So the last slide just reflects on a couple of aspects then of looking ahead. So just to summarize, so the entire developmental agenda for industrialization, of course, in terms of the work that has been done through IDDA3, has allowed us to really do a lot of important groundwork and to explore these opportunities for industrialization. And what we have done through this work is also collaborated closely with partners, including ASHO, in terms of the promotion of the UNIDO goals in terms of inclusive and sustainable and industrial development for the continent as a whole. And we are looking forward in terms of how this will inform, of course, also the work in terms of IDDA4. What's important, also perhaps as a couple of takeaways. So we have a very particular focus and a competence, and a lot of the participants today are also partners and partner institutions. I recognize colleagues from PTB, from Senelec and such. And we are very importantly proud to say that there's a lot of collaboration with all these institutions in terms of the development of quality infrastructure, and to ensure we have a common understanding and approach in terms of how this is done, even in terms of aspects such as the recent quality index for sustainable development, that as a objective basis in terms of how quality infrastructure and the improvement of that is measured. And here again, we recognize even aspects of SPS, which also comes, of course, very importantly into play when you look at Africa, because a significant part of the trade that we see in value chains is highly dependent on various SPS provisions that need to be complied to. Thank you to the ITC, to Ms. Spies for a wonderful presentation on the work they're doing in value chains. We are also collaborating with ITC as a partner in the future ATC MAP program, hopefully for SADC, but also in various other parts of the continent, as Catherine mentioned. And it's really important in terms of a concerted approach in terms of regional value chain development, where we have value addition and high value products that come from that as one of the ultimate goals. And of course, important that the strategic commodities. And it's really interesting, the presentation by Ms. Spes on looking at the batteries and the electrical vehicles and all that, because this is where we as a continent collectively need to be moving to. Importantly is the investment in infrastructure, specifically from your perspective, a significant focus on reliable energy, clean energy, and of course aspects also of transportation, but quite importantly, digitalization. And in this context, we're doing a significant amount of work in digitalization as relates to especially the work of standards bodies, and to ensure that standards are more readily available through digital means, and also in terms of the processes for the development of such standards to be more inclusive and to be actually a lot faster than it's been done in traditional means. Really importantly, the ultimate goal is that we have a much more diversified economy in Africa, and focusing on sectors, including eco-friendly manufacturing services and technologies to reduce dependency on raw materials, while employing also, a green growth lens in the context of sustainability. Thank you so much from our side, and for the opportunity, Chair, to have been part of this really interesting discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Francois, for the good presentation. Due to the constraint of time, I would like just to ask one question. Especially you are working on essential oils. We know the impact of the EU deforestation regulation on those essential oils. You are working on fisheries. What have you seen as the role of quality infrastructure either in South Africa or Mozambique to be able to comply to the European Union market?
Chair, just to jump into this, sorry, Catherine, I'll take this one. I think the key challenge we have is that the conformity assessment requirement in terms of technical regulations that is required, especially with not just the EU as a market, but also especially the US and some of the other, let's call them high value markets, and are posing extreme challenges in terms of the compliance requirements. And where we see this being important is this is not just important in the actual, let's call it packaging and processing of your end product, but right from the point where the actual farmer needs to understand that what he puts into the ground as a fertilizer or the quality of the water he's using. And this same thing applies, for example, to fisheries. We see a lot of movement in Africa in terms of aquaculture, and the challenges we have with aquaculture lies in the quality, for example, of things like the fish feed. You can't just take your waste garbage or the leftover food and throw it to the fish pond for the fish to eat. There are very stringent requirements in terms of the feed of the fish. And I'm using a very simple example, Chair, because these are the challenges we face. We see that the producers themselves of the products are well informed. There is still a significant challenge to have services in conformity assessments that are internationally recognized. And there we see huge challenges still with accreditation systems that are not yet fully evolved, and also where the scopes of accreditation of these services do not yet cater for the very broad requirement of services. It's not just for testing or calibration, but also for things like refugee testing schemes and reference materials and so on. And the challenge we have is the markets keep moving the goalposts. So as soon as we reach a point of compliance, you see that some of the markets will even have more stringent requirements, for example, in terms of heavy metals and fishery products. So while you could comply today and you have testing facilities and they allow you to meet certain capabilities to measure the levels of heavy metals, whether it's a cadmium, mercury, and such in your fish, you'll find that what is good today for entering a certain market may not be good enough next year, because the goalposts keep changing. And that, in a nutshell, Chair, I think some of the examples, and these are the challenges that we still have to resolve. Thank you.
Thank you. Next time I will ask you a tough one. Maybe why not the destination market, not in South Africa or in the region? But that is for next time. No, not today. Let's move toward concluding. The time is not on our side. I would like to give just 1 minute for each panelist, to give us one key message, takeaway, one, not 2 recommendations, just one. I start with Arzo, Emmanuel, Kirwa. What is the key message that we can go with for today's webinar?
Thank you very much, SG. I think the key message takeaway is for the Made in Africa. This is quite timely as it promotes manufacturing, research, industrialization, as well as innovation to achieve competitive production of domestic and export-oriented products that includes products which were not initially under commercialization, because if you are inculcating issues to do with standards adherence, it will encompass issues to do with safety and the requirements of the market, and therefore also the other part is on integrating the indigenous knowledge for the creative economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Julia, what would be your key takeaway message?
I think it's that we all collectively need to recognize the wealth available on the African continent, and that we shouldn't be intimidated of the necessary steps to actually make use of the richness of the continent to its own benefit.
Thank you very much. Kwame.
Yes, so thanks again. So for me, I think it's important to remind all of us that creating or building regional value chains will not come automatically. It's not. We can't leave it to the market. So we need deliberate actions, interventions, and the strategic discussions to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mwangi, you did not answer the question. Francois answered the question. What is the takeaway from UNIDO?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nsengiman. I look forward to answering a question next time. So I will be ready. But in all seriousness, to say that I think for me, looking at value chain development in the continent, it's really important that we stop looking at raw materials, but we really need to focus on enhancing value addition and diversification so that Africa's industrial development can really take off. Thank you.
Thank you. Francois, she left you with 30 seconds.
Yeah, I will mention that we still have an over-reliance on the continent, on governments and the public sector to have to be responsible to provide with especially conformity assessment infrastructure. And it's really important that the public sector steps up. Conformity assessment can be really more efficient and much more successful and accessible when this is also provided in the private sector. And I think the environment in terms of harmonized technical regulations, harmonized standards, and of course, the very important aspects of a common understanding of accreditation and to ensure that there's competent services. This is all there. But the private sector should not be left behind, and we need people to step up and not leave the challenge just to the developmental partners and the governments of the various nations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. In summary, we need the Made in Africa is very timely, as it will help also export the indigenous product. We should use the richness of our continent. We shouldn't fear to start, and the value chain will not be developed today. Yeah, there is future. We need to understand that we are starting, and we understand the value addition that is very important. We avoid to continue trading in raw material, and the capacity building in a quality infrastructure, especially conformity assessment, technical regulation, and the harmonization of standard. I take this opportunity to thank my panelists. I think they deserve a virtual applause. Yeah, thank you very much for your good presentations and insight. And I invite you for our next webinar next month. As usual, we will announce all the topic for our next webinar. I welcome you for the tourism and sustainable development issues that will be in collaboration with Egypt Organization for Standardization in this next month webinar. I would like to request you to put on your cameras, then we take a photo of the group. If you can put on your cameras and nice smile of the day. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. You are taking photos. Are you taking photos? Yeah, we will circulate the presentations as usual and on your emails. Yeah, and thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.